Now, the energy giant BP's profits more than doubled to £23 billion last year amid a spike in gas prices linked to the war in Ukraine. The company paid a total of £1.8 billion in UK tax. Today, there have been renewed calls for the UK government to increase its windfall tax, and BP has come under fire for scaling back its planned reduction in oil and gas exploration. We discussed the issues with Mike Tholen from Offshore Energies UK and the environmental lawyer and campaigner Tessa Khan. Mike, £23 billion in profits, £1.8 billion of that paid in tax in the UK, while people are struggling with energy bills. On the face of it, that seems almost obscene, doesn't it?
BP certainly reported very large profits, but for those profits made in the UK is already taking 75% of the profits in tax. So we're already reaping the benefits of that windfall here in the UK.
Tessa, so oil and gas production, as we've just heard Mike saying, already being taxed at 75% in the UK. How much higher would you want that to be?
Well, actually, I think the important thing to note here is that there is a huge loophole embedded in that windfall tax. Aside from the fact that 75% as a tax rate just brings the UK to around the global average tax rate on the oil and gas industry in normal times, let alone in times of extraordinary profits. But there is a loophole, as I said, and that loophole basically allows companies like BP, who are planning investments in new oil and gas projects in the UK, to get a massive write-down on their tax bills, to the extent that that loophole amounts to a subsidy of about £11 billion to the industry over the next few years. So there is certainly more that the UK government could be doing to recoup some of those excessive profits and make sure that families up and down the country who are seeing their energy bills go up at the same time as BP's profits are getting the help that they need.
Mike, more tax could be paid.
Very little more tax we paid. The UK is already going to receive something like £30 billion in tax over this year and next year. Companies have to keep investing to meet the oil and gas needs of the UK as we go through the energy transition. Any country allows companies to offset those investments against their tax bill. It's the same in Norway, it's the same in the UK.
And Tessa, are you not convinced that that extra money that Mike is talking about is being reinvested towards an energy transition?
Well, no, it's certainly not being invested in an energy transition, which would suggest a transition away from oil and gas. I mean, BP's data that was published today made it very clear that they've decreased the amount that they invest in low carbon investment and their overall investment in renewable energy, which ultimately is the kind of energy that we can afford here in the UK as opposed to gas at the moment, that is a tiny fraction, 1/14 of the amount that they're paying out in shareholder dividends and buybacks. So I think, we should be extremely dubious of the idea that companies are reinvesting this money in energy that is accessible to us in the UK.
And so you would be calling for a bigger windfall tax. What kind of figures are you talking about, Tessa?
So as I said, I think the most obvious thing to do is to close the loophole in the existing windfall tax, and that would mean that companies don't get a massive tax break for investing or opening up new oil and gas fields, which would amount to about £10.6 billion that the Treasury could then use to help the people in this country who need it the most, who at the moment can't pay their energy bills, which is exactly what's driving up BP and Shell's and others' profits.
And Mike, on that point.
I think we're simply looking at very different businesses here. The UK has to keep investing in energy, both oil and gas and indeed renewable energy, to meet our demands both in the short term and through the long term. Simply cutting supply will only make prices worse, it will damage our energy security, and not least here in the northeast of Scotland will damage jobs, damage businesses that are at the heart of the energy transition. We can slam our door in the future, or we can embrace it, and our industry is trying to embrace it.
But the point that Tessa was making is that companies are not investing, and BP scaling back on the promise to cut oil and gas production might actually confirm what Tessa is saying, that maybe the big companies can't be relied upon to invest.
Well, quite the contrary. BP has said it's going to continue investing and upping its investment both in renewables and in oil and gas because it's trying to meet both short-term demand and a long-term energy transition. There are already huge, bold investment plans in the UK, not least here in the northeast of Scotland, to invest in 50 gigawatts of wind over the next 5 to 10 years. We are investing at a rate never seen before in the UK in the energy transition. Trying to invest fast will simply drive inflation up, across the investment sector, and we'll be just chasing numbers rather than delivering new megawatts and gigawatts to supply our needs.
Tessa, you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, just to say that there are indeed major new wind projects, for example, that are being invested in the UK, but they're not being invested in by the oil and gas industry. I think that's what we've got to be clear about here. 3/4 of North Sea oil and gas companies invest nothing in renewables in the UK, and BP's CEO was explicit last week that the returns on renewables are not good enough for them to continue to invest at their planned level. They're going to decrease their amount of investment in renewables.
On that point, Mike.
I think when you look, again, just look at the facts. In the northeast of Scotland, Scotland Round, Oil and Gas UK, OE UK now, half our members are investing in wind, one way or another. It's right at the heart of what we're doing in the energy transition. We're investing something like £11 billion over the next 10 years in offshore wind in the UK.
Tessa, Mike has mentioned the fact he's in the northeast of Scotland, and you are speaking about piling more tax onto an industry that supports either directly or indirectly up to 120,000 jobs. That's a lot to ask, isn't it?
Yeah, listen, I mean, I think the thing that we need to get clear about here is the fact that this is an industry that at the moment is making record-breaking profits isn't trickling down to the oil and gas industry workforce. And it's an industry that we know, according to industry-endorsed forecasts, is going to have a huge chunk, up to 80% of jobs automated by 2035. I mean, if we're serious about protecting that workforce and making sure that they have a future, we should be supporting them to be reskilled and retrained to move into the industries that we know are going to be sustainable, like wind, like solar, like renewable energy.
OK, well, finally, just a very final point from you both. First of all, Tessa, hasn't the energy crisis that's been sparked by the war in Ukraine highlighted how reliant we actually are on oil and gas?
Yeah, it has. And I think what it's highlighted are the real perils of that reliance. And what we've heard from both industry and the UK government is that it doesn't matter how much oil and gas we produce here in the North Sea. It's not going to make a difference to the price that we pay for those commodities because they're internationally traded. And in fact, we export 80% of the oil that we produce here. So the industry is doing so little to meet our domestic energy demand. They'll sell their product where they can make the most profit. The only real energy security lies in renewable energy, not to mention that that's the only energy that's compatible with a livable climate in the future.
And very finally on that point, please, Mike.
You know, our industry in the northeast of Scotland is here to embrace the energy future. That means investing not just in oil and gas, but also in renewables. And I'm afraid, come to the northeast of Scotland, see the evidence, we're doing both, and we'll do both to help suppress prices and embrace a future of low carbon and a really exciting energy future here in the UK.
And there we will have to leave it. Mike Tholen, Tessa Khan, thank you both for joining us in Scotland tonight.